So we're here today just examining a study where we are trying to just assess where we are as far as Palmer amaranth and its tolerance to dicamba. When the system first came out several years ago, we were getting just awesome control of Palmer amaranth with a half pound of dicamba, and that really settled for the first several years it was out. Really kind of starting a little in 18, but really 2019, we started getting numerous reports of folks disappointed with their Palmer amaranth control with a 1X rated dicamba, which really kind of got a bunch of us thinking that maybe we're starting to see a little bit of backsliding as far as the capability of 1X rated dicamba on Palmer amaranth. So this is a study looking at different rates, and I am standing in 22 ounces of XtendiMax, which is the 1X rated dicamba. And this is 3 weeks after application, and we applied them when it was 4 to 6 inches tall. It also had a quart of Roundup Power Max with it. And you can see we've gotten control of a good many of them, but we've left a number of them too. Now, they're not growing as fast as they would otherwise if you look at the susceptible check, but just now they're starting to really get their feet back under them, and a lot of these will not die, been my experience from last year, and will go on to produce seed. So how do we manage them? Well, we got to come back with some other kind of application, and there's a number of options here. One would be Liberty in cotton, would be a very good option, would finish these off. Another would be another application of dicamba, and barring that, we have had some luck with FlexStar over the top of these, particularly if you catch it about a week after that dicamba application. But that's kind of where we are. It looks like we're starting to see kind of the slow progression of Palmer amaranth developing tolerance, increasing tolerance to dicamba. Okay, we're moving down from our dicamba test that we're just looking at strictly weeds, and now we're looking actually in Enlist soybean. And in Enlist soybeans, the idea is to use a pre and then come back with your Enlist or your Liberty or a combination thereof. This is an example if you don't do that. So this had no pre, this just had one application of Enlist 1 on it at a quart rate, which is the 1X rate. And the thing I wanted to point out is we've got some dead pigweed here, but we've got some that haven't died. And again, this was applied about 6 inches tall, Palmer amaranth. But these Palmer amaranth that survived look very similar to what we see from dicamba on the Palmer pigweed that survived. I mean, they're kind of laying down and it's kind of checked up the growth, but they're not dead. And some of them are indeed putting their faces back to the sun and coming on. So what it really looks like is, we're used a lot of dicamba in this state on our Palmer amaranth to manage it. And again, it's done a very good job first few years out of the gate. In recent years, 19, and in some research we're seeing here today, we're not seeing the control we saw in 17 and 18, and even in research prior to that at a half pound rate. So the other option, of course, is Enlist and coming out with 2,4-D, or Enlist 1 in this case. But it looks like, at least from what we see here, that the ramp up in tolerance to dicamba, the 2,4-D might be hitching along for the ride as well. So the big thing is just not relying on Enlist 1 in these Xtend soybeans, using a pre, like we got over here, some of these other treatments, and then coming back post-emergence with your Enlist 1, and then come back with a Liberty in this case to try and take out these ones that escaped. We can't just be relying, even in Enlist crops, just like dicamba crops, on one herbicide to try and manage Palmer pigweed long term. This is one of the tests where we went out in these soybeans and we sprayed them, and they were a little on, Palmer amaranth would have been a little bit on the big side. They were 6 inches or so, maybe some a little bit taller, with 22 ounces of XtendiMax and a quart of Roundup Power Max. Then we came back 10 days after that application with another 22 ounces of XtendiMax, and we are standing here today 2 weeks after that follow-up application. And you can see the control leaves a lot to be desired. We're going to compare and contrast this to looking at using the actual pre and then following up, because we are getting better control with that. But we do have a number of folks, because Roundup and dicamba has been so effective, particularly on Palmer amaranth, basically not even using a pre anymore. But with the sliding we're starting to see in the effectiveness of dicamba on Palmer amaranth, that's not going to be a good way to go, clearly. What we're looking at is, again, Palmer amaranth that's escaped an application of Roundup and XtendiMax. Also, we have escapes out here of prickly Sida and jungle rice, which kind of been the three last year or two have been very common in a lot of our fields, slipping through a Roundup and dicamba application. So what we've done here in these Xtend beans is we come back over the top last week with a high rate of Anthem Max, 4 ounces to the acre and a quarter Roundup. And you can see it's starting to work on the pigweed pretty good. I hope it goes ahead and takes those escapes on down. My guess is it will some and maybe not others, but it's still too early to tell. And the glyphosate, I hope, will work on the jungle rice. We do have about 15% of the population of jungle rice in this state is glyphosate resistant. So in most cases, it should control it, but we'll find out here in about 10 days. One of the treatments I really want to highlight here is actually a very pleasant treatment that actually is working quite well. And what it is overlaying residuals. And you hear me time and time again about talking about overlaying residual herbicides in order to get good, in particular, Palmer amaranth control. And that's what we have here. We have Authority MTZ applied pre-emergence, which did a very good job. And then we came over the top with Anthem Max, Roundup, and XtendiMax. Those three over the top. So we got a residual on top of a residual. So we had very few pigweed to have to even deal with when they came up. And in this case, the Anthem Max with the dicamba did a very good job taking out those small pigweed that happened to get through the Authority MTZ. Now we'll compare and contrast this where we're overlaying effective residual herbicides and getting them activated to using a different technique. We're moving over to another treatment now, and in this treatment, we're looking at just using Roundup, a quarter Roundup, and 22 ounces of XtendiMax post-emergence, about V2, V3 soybean here. And you can see we leave a lot to be desired. This particular treatment a few years ago was actually more effective on pigweed than what we're seeing here today. We're seeing more and more of them kind of struggle through, and it really goes to show using an effective residual herbicide up front and keeping the numbers down that you have to try and manage post-emergence with any post-emergence herbicide. In this case, though, with dicamba, is a big winning situation. But when we don't have any residual in here, I know it's convenient and easy, but from a weed management standpoint, it just doesn't have any consistency as the years go by. In this third treatment, we're looking at kind of in between. Instead of using a effective pre and overlaying another residual, what we're using here is no pre-emergence, total post, and going out with a quarter Roundup, 22 ounces of XtendiMax, and 48 ounces of Warrant. And you can see we've got much better control than when we just went out with Roundup and dicamba. The Warrant is bringing a lot to the table from a residual standpoint. Unfortunately, though, we still have pigweed that got through that Roundup dicamba application. A few years ago, that would not have been the case, but here in 2020, we're seeing a few of them that are escaping, in some fields a little more than a few, that are escaping a Roundup dicamba application. So it's even more critical to try and manage them up front and never let them come up, and then overlay that residual on top of them and hopefully get a timely activating rainfall. 2020 has been a very good year for pre-emergence herbicides in general, and it really kind of shows in this test where we don't have one up front, but we do have one post. It is helping some, but we still got to try and kill the pigweed that got through the dicamba. In treatment 4 of this particular test, what we're seeing here is 4 ounces of metribuzin applied pre-emergence, and then post-emergence at V2 to V3 soybeans coming back with a quarter Roundup and 22 ounces of XtendiMax. You can see this particular program's leaving a lot of pigweeds and a little bit of grass starting to come through because we didn't overlay another effective residual herbicide for Palmer amaranth. The dicamba in this case gave us around 70% control, a little better maybe, but it still left around 20 to 25% of them. On top of that, we had another flush of smaller pigweed because we didn't have another overlapping residual out here. Again, we got to overlap the residuals in our Xtend soybeans and really in any crops to give consistently effective weed control, particularly for Palmer amaranth.